You just ruined a $3,000 suit, and I'm going to make sure you never work another day in your life." The millionaire's fingers were crushing the old waitress's wrist, and 70-year-old Rose Miller cried out in front of 400 of Chicago's richest people, and not one of them moved. Not one. They just watched a powerful man break an old woman over a spilled glass of wine, until a tired young event manager with holes in her shoes stepped out of the crowd, looked the monster dead in the eye, and did the one thing nobody in that city had dared to do in 20 years. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face. She had no idea he was the Mafia boss. Before we go any further, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and follow Emma's story all the way to the end, and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Emma Carter had spent 11 hours on her feet that night, and she was almost done, almost home. That was the only thing on her mind as she moved through the back of the grand ballroom with her clipboard pressed to her chest. Just finish the job, just get through the last hour, collect her check, and go home to her father. She was 27 years old, and she had learned a long time ago how to make herself invisible in rooms full of people who would never remember her face. She had organized this gala from the ground up. Every table, every centerpiece, every glass of champagne had passed through her planning, and yet not one of the 400 guests knew her name. That was the way it worked. The people who did the work were never the people who got the credit. Emma had made peace with that. She had bills to pay, and pride didn't pay bills. Her father did. Every dollar she earned tonight had a place to go before she ever touched it. The hospital took most of it. Frank Carter had been sick for 2 years now, and the treatments were the kind that insurance companies like to call not medically necessary, which was their polite way of saying, "We won't pay, so you'd better." Emma paid. She worked doubles. She skipped meals. She wore the same 2 pairs of shoes until the soles wore through, and she paid. So when the sound cut through the ballroom, that sharp cry of pain, Emma froze in place, because she knew that sound. She knew what it was to be hurt by someone who had more power than you. She turned. Across the room, near the head table where the champagne fountain glittered, a man in a dark suit was holding an elderly waitress by the arm. And the waitress was Rose. Sweet Rose, who had brought Emma a cup of coffee at 2 in the morning when they were setting up. Rose, who had grandchildren whose pictures she kept in her apron pocket. Rose, whose face was now white with fear. "Please, sir," Rose was saying, her voice trembling. "It was an accident. I'll pay for the cleaning. I'll pay for all of it. I promise you, please." "Pay for it?" The man laughed. It was an ugly laugh, cold and sharp, the laugh of a man who found other people's fear entertaining. "Do you have any idea what this suit costs? You couldn't pay for the buttons. You couldn't pay for the thread." Emma's feet were already moving. She didn't decide to move. Her body decided for her. "I'll have your job by morning," the man went on. "I'll call the manager tonight, and then I'll call every hotel in this city, and I'll make sure that the name Rose Miller means nothing to anyone. Do you understand me? 30 years, and you'll leave here with nothing." "Sir, please, I have a family." "Then you should have thought about your family before you spilled wine on me." The crowd around them had gone quiet, that particular quiet of people who are watching something cruel and have decided it isn't their business. A few of them looked away. A few of them actually leaned in, curious, the way people slow down to look at a car accident. But nobody spoke. 400 of the richest, most influential people in Chicago, and every single one of them chose silence. Emma had seen this before, not this exact scene, but the shape of it. The powerful hurting the powerless, and everyone agreeing not to notice. She had spent her whole life keeping her head down in rooms like this. She knew the rules. You did not make trouble. You did not draw attention. You did your job, and you went home. She heard herself speak anyway. "Let go of her." The words came out steadier than she expected. The man turned, and for the first time, Emma got a good look at him. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if it hadn't been so cold. Everything about him was expensive, from the watch on his wrist to the way he held himself, like a man who had never once in his life waited in a line. His eyes found Emma, and she watched confusion pass across his face, then something worse, Amusement. Excuse me? I said, let go of her, Emma repeated. You're hurting her. She apologized. It was an accident. Let her go. The man released Rose's arm slowly, almost thoughtfully, and turned his full attention to Emma. And that was the moment she understood she had made a mistake. Because a man like this did not stop when you told him to stop. He only became more interested. And who, he said, taking a step toward her, are you? It doesn't matter who I am. Oh, I think it does. He looked her up and down, taking in her plain black uniform, her sensible shoes, the clipboard she was still holding against her chest like a shield. You're staff. You're the help. You're nobody. And you're telling me what to do? I'm telling you to treat another human being like a human being, Emma said. That's all. She made a mistake. People make mistakes. It costs you nothing to let it go. Rose was tugging at Emma's sleeve now, her eyes wide with terror. Miss, please don't. It's all right. Please don't get involved. You'll lose your job. But Emma couldn't stop now. She'd started, and something in her chest had come loose, some knot she'd been carrying for years. The knot of every time she'd stayed quiet, every time she'd let someone with money treat someone without it like they were less than nothing. Do you know what she does? Emma said. She's on her feet for 12 hours. She carries trays until her arms shake. She comes in early and she stays late, and she does it for people who never even look at her face. And you're going to end her career because she spilled a glass of wine? The man's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. You have quite a mouth for someone who's about to be unemployed. Then fire me, Emma said. But leave her alone. Something flickered across his face then, something that wasn't amusement anymore. He wasn't used to this. That much was obvious. He was a man who had spent his entire life having people fold in front of him, and here was a woman in a waitress uniform who wasn't folding. It fascinated him, and it enraged him in equal measure. You have no idea who I am, he said quietly. No, Emma agreed, and I don't care. Somewhere in the crowd, someone gasped. A man near the front actually took a step back, as if Emma had said something dangerous. Emma didn't understand why. She just knew that the temperature in the room had changed. My name, the man said, is Alexander Voss. He said it the way a person might announce the name of a king. He said it expecting it to land like a physical blow, expecting Emma to go pale, to stammer, to apologize. And when she didn't, when she just looked at him with those steady, tired eyes, Emma saw genuine surprise cross his features. I don't know who that is, she said. That, somehow, was the thing that got to him. Not her defiance, her indifference. The whispers around them told Emma that everyone else in this room knew exactly who Alexander Voss was, and that they were afraid of him. But Emma had spent the last 2 years in hospital waiting rooms and double shifts. She didn't read the business pages. She didn't move in these circles. To her, he was just a cruel man in an expensive suit, and she had met plenty of those. You don't know who I am, Alexander repeated, and now there was something almost dangerous in his stillness. That's remarkable, truly. Let me help you then. I own half the real estate in this city. I own the building your little event company works out of. I have friends who could make sure you never work in Chicago again with a single phone call. One call, that's all it would take. Then make it, Emma said. She didn't know where the courage came from. Maybe it wasn't courage at all. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe when you've spent 2 years watching your father waste away, when you've counted pennies at the pharmacy counter, when you've cried in the bathroom of a hospital at 3 a.m, a man in an expensive suit threatening your job just doesn't frighten you the way it's supposed to. You're serious, Alexander said. He sounded almost delighted. You'd throw away your entire livelihood for a waitress you don't even know. She's not a waitress I don't know, Emma said. She's a person. That's enough. For a moment, they just looked at each other. And in that moment, something passed between them that neither of them fully understood. Alexander Voss had built an empire on fear. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, who flattered him, who trembled before him. And here was a woman who wanted nothing, who was afraid of nothing, who was looking at him like he was the smallest person in the room. It should have made him furious, and it did. But underneath the fury was something else, something that hadn't stirred in him in a very long time. Curiosity, respect even, though he would have died before admitting it. "You know," he said, stepping closer, close enough now that Emma had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "I could ruin you. I could ruin your family. Do you have family? A husband? Parents? I could make their lives very difficult." "Are you threatening my family now?" Emma's voice had gone very quiet. "You went from a waitress to my family in about 30 seconds. What kind of man does that?" "The kind who wins. The kind who's afraid," Emma corrected, "because the only people who threaten families are the ones who know they've already lost the argument." That did it. Emma watched the last of Alexander's control slip. He reached out and grabbed her arm, the same way he'd grabbed Rose, his fingers closing hard around her bicep, and he yanked her toward him, and he said in a low, furious voice, "Listen to me, you little..." And that was when instinct took over. Emma didn't decide to do it. Later, when she replayed the moment 1,000 times in her mind, she would never be able to say that she chose it. Her arm came up on its own. Her hand cracked across his face with every ounce of strength in her body, and the sound of it, that sharp, echoing slap, cut through the ballroom like a gunshot. The entire room went silent. 400 people. Not one of them breathed. Alexander Voss slowly turned his head back to face her. There was a red mark blooming across his cheek in the shape of Emma's hand. His eyes were wide, and for one long, terrible second, Emma had no idea what he was going to do. Neither did anyone else. The silence stretched on and on. Somewhere, a glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered on the floor, and nobody even flinched, because every eye in the room was fixed on the woman who had just slapped Alexander Voss across the face in front of the entire city. Emma's heart was pounding. Her hands stung. She had never hit anyone in her life. She wasn't a violent person, but she had felt his fingers digging into her arm, and something ancient and protective had risen up in her, and now it was done, and she couldn't take it back. "You hit me," Alexander said. He sounded genuinely astonished. Not angry in that moment, astonished, as if she'd broken some law of physics. "You actually hit me." "You put your hands on me first," Emma said. And to her own amazement, her voice didn't shake. "Don't ever touch me again." The crowd was murmuring now, a low, horrified buzz. Emma caught fragments of it. "Does she know who that is? She's insane. She's finished. That's the end of her." And underneath all of it, a kind of dark, fascinated excitement. Because these were people who lived comfortable lives, and they had just watched something they would talk about for years. Rose was crying quietly beside her, gripping Emma's sleeve, whispering, oh, honey, what have you done? What have you done?" Emma didn't know what she'd done. Not really. Not yet. Because she didn't know that the man standing in front of her, the man with her handprint on his cheek, was not simply Alexander Voss, real estate millionaire. That was the name he used in daylight, the name that appeared in the newspapers, the name that went on the buildings. She didn't know that his real name was Victor Voss. She didn't know that behind the Millionaire was a man who controlled one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Midwest, a man whose name was whispered in fear by people far more dangerous than anyone in that ballroom. Businessmen paid him. Politicians answered his calls. Men who had killed for a living crossed the street when they saw him coming. He was not a man you challenged. He was not a man you defied. And he was most certainly not a man you slapped across the face in front of 400 witnesses. Emma didn't know any of that. She just knew that her father needed her, and that her shift was almost over, and that she had probably just lost the only job she had. Alexander, or rather Victor, was studying her now with an expression she couldn't read. The astonishment had faded. The anger had faded too, strangely enough. What replaced them was something colder and more calculating, something that made the hair on the back of Emma's neck stand up. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a puzzle he intends to solve. "What's your name?" he asked. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me now." He touched his cheek, almost absently, where her hand had left its mark. "You've just done something that no one, and I mean no one, has done to me in 20 years. So I'll ask you again. What is your name?" Emma lifted her chin. If she was going down, she was going down without hiding. Emma Carter. Emma Carter, Victor repeated slowly, tasting the name, filing it away somewhere in that cold and careful mind of his. Well, Emma Carter, I think you and I are going to become very well acquainted. There was something in the way he said it that frightened Emma more than any threat could have. A threat she could understand. But this was a promise, and she didn't know what it meant. Are you going to fire me? She asked. Because if you are, just do it. I've got a bus to catch. A strange thing happened then. Victor Voss laughed. Not the cold, cruel laugh from before, but something real, something surprised out of him. The people around them stared, because they had never heard him laugh like that, not once. A bus to catch, he repeated. You slap me across the face in front of half of Chicago, and your concern is catching a bus. Some of us can't afford cars, Emma said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish. And she turned around. She turned her back on Victor Voss, the Mafia boss, the most feared man in the city, and she walked away from him, and the crowd parted in front of her like she was carrying something dangerous. Behind her, she could feel his eyes on her back the entire way. She should have felt relieved. She'd survived it. She'd said her piece and walked away in one piece. But something told her, some deep animal instinct, that this was not over, that in fact it had only just begun. She was right. The rest of that night passed in a blur. Emma finished her shift on autopilot, her hands moving through the familiar motions of breaking down the event while her mind raced. She kept expecting a security guard to appear and escort her out. She kept expecting the manager to storm over and fire her on the spot. But nothing happened. Nobody came. And somehow the nothing was worse than something would have been. Rose found her near the coat check as the night wound down. The old woman's eyes were still red from crying, and she took both of Emma's hands in her own and held them tight. You shouldn't have done that, Rose whispered. You have no idea. You have no idea who that man is, sweetheart. He's a bully, Emma said. That's all I need to know. No! Rose shook her head slowly, and there was real fear in her face, the kind of fear that made Emma's stomach tighten. No, Emma, he's more than that. There are stories about that man. Terrible stories. People who cross him, they don't just lose their jobs. They disappear. I've worked in these hotels for 30 years. I've heard things, and I'm telling you, you need to be careful. You need to be very, very careful. Emma wanted to laugh it off. She wanted to tell Rose she was being dramatic, that men like that were all bark, that he'd already forgotten her name. But she couldn't quite make herself believe it, because she'd seen his eyes when he'd said they would become well acquainted. And there had been nothing empty about that look. I did it for you, Emma said softly. I'd do it again. Rose's eyes filled with tears. I know you would. That's what scares me. You've got a good heart, Emma Carter. In a world like this, a good heart can get you killed. Emma caught the last bus home at nearly 1 a.m. She sat by the window and watched the city slide past, the lights of Chicago blurring in the cold, and she tried to convince herself that everything was fine. She'd finish out the week, collect her pay, and forget the whole thing ever happened. Rich men like Victor Voss had short attention spans. He'd move on to some other target by Monday. She let herself into the small apartment she shared with her father, moving quietly so as not to wake him. But the light was on in his room, and when she peeked in, Frank Carter was awake, propped up against his pillows, an old paperback open in his lap. You're home late, he said. His voice was thin these days, thinner than it used to be. The illness had taken so much from him, but his eyes were still sharp, still her father's eyes. Big event, Emma said, forcing a smile. You should be asleep, Dad. Couldn't sleep. He set the book down and looked at her the way he always did, the way that made her feel like he could see straight through to whatever she was hiding. Something happened tonight. I can see it on your face. What is it? Emma sat down on the edge of his bed. She'd never been able to lie to him, not even to protect him. I did something stupid, she admitted. There was a man at the gala. He was hurting an old woman who works there, this sweet lady named Rose. He was screaming at her, threatening to destroy her life, all because she spilled some wine on him. And nobody did anything. All those rich, important people just stood there and let it happen. And you didn't, Frank said. It wasn't a question. He knew his daughter. I told him to stop, and he grabbed my arm. Emma looked down at her hands. "So I slapped him." Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Emma's surprise, he started to laugh, a rusty, wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. "Dad!" "That's my girl," he said when he'd caught his breath. "That's exactly what your mother would have done. God rest her. She never could stand a bully either." He reached out and took Emma's hand. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Don't you dare feel bad about it." "He said he could ruin us," Emma said quietly. "He said he could make sure I never work in this city again. And Dad, the way he said it, I believed him." The laughter faded from Frank's face. He squeezed her hand a little tighter. "Listen to me," he said. "You've been carrying this family on your back for 2 years. You've given up everything for me. Your friends, your dreams, your whole life. You put it all on hold to take care of a sick old man. And not once, not one single time, have you complained." His eyes were wet now. "So if a rich man wants to be angry because my daughter has more courage than every coward in that room combined, then let him be angry. You did nothing wrong. You hear me? Nothing." Emma leaned forward and rested her head on her father's chest, the way she had when she was a little girl, and for the first time all night, she let herself cry. "I'm scared, Dad," she whispered. "I know," he said, stroking her hair with a trembling hand. "But we'll be all right. We always are. You and me. We always find a way." Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe it more than she'd ever wanted anything. But somewhere across the city, in a mansion she couldn't even imagine, a man was standing at a tall window looking out over the lights of Chicago, and he was still touching the place on his cheek where her hand had struck him. And he was smiling, not cruelly this time, thoughtfully. Because Victor Voss had just spent 20 years believing that everyone had a price, that everyone could be bought or broken or frightened into submission. And in the space of 5 minutes, a woman in a waitress uniform had proven him wrong. She hadn't wanted his money. She hadn't feared his name. She had looked him dead in the eye and told him to be a better man, and then she had walked away without a backward glance. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He picked up his phone and made a single call. "I need you to find someone for me," he said into the darkness. "Her name is Emma Carter. She works for the event company that ran the gala tonight. I want to know everything about her, where she lives, who she lives with, what she owes and who she owes it to. Everything." A pause. "No, don't touch her. Not yet. Just find her. I want to understand her." He set the phone down and turned back to the window, and for a long time he simply stood there, watching the city he owned, thinking about the one thing in it he couldn't seem to control. Emma had no idea any of this was happening. She had cried herself out on her father's chest, and now she was lying in her own narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, telling herself over and over that it was going to be fine. That by the end of the week, Victor Voss would have forgotten she existed. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about almost everything that night. Because Victor Voss was not going to forget her. He was going to change her life. He was going to destroy it first, brick by brick, in ways she couldn't yet imagine. And then he was going to offer her a bargain so strange and so dangerous that saying yes would mean stepping into a world of secrets and violence she had only ever seen in movies. He was going to become the most important person she had ever met, and she was going to become the only person on earth who could reach the frozen thing where his heart should have been. But all of that was still to come. For now, there was only a tired young woman in a small apartment, a sick father sleeping in the next room, and a handprint fading on the cheek of the most dangerous man in Chicago. Emma finally drifted off to sleep, just as the sky outside her window was beginning to turn gray. And in her last waking moment, she thought about Rose's frightened face and the warning in the old woman's eyes. A good heart can get you killed. Emma didn't know it yet, but her good heart had just made her the most interesting person in Victor Voss's world. And in his world, being interesting was the most dangerous thing a person could possibly be. The phone in her bag was already, at that very moment, being disconnected. The event company was already, at that very moment, drawing up the paperwork to let her go. The machine had already been set in motion, silent and invisible, and Emma slept through the first hours of her life falling apart, unaware that when she woke, nothing would ever be the same again. She had defended a stranger. She had slapped a rude millionaire to protect an old woman she barely knew. She never imagined, not for one single second, that the man whose face she had struck was the boss of the Mafia, and she had absolutely no idea that it was the best and worst thing she would ever do. The phone died first. Emma noticed it Monday morning when she tried to call the event company to confirm her schedule for the week. The screen lit up, then flashed a message she'd never seen before. Service disconnected. Please contact your provider. She frowned and tried again, and got the same message, and a cold little worm of worry began to move in her stomach. She'd paid that bill. She was sure of it. She kept careful records of every payment because she had to, because there was never any margin for error in her life. She used the neighbor's phone to call the provider, and a bored voice on the other end told her that her account had been closed at the request of the account holder. "But I'm the account holder," Emma said. "I didn't close anything." "I'm sorry, ma'am. The system shows a closure request was processed Saturday night. There's nothing I can do." Saturday night, the night of the gala, the night she'd slapped Victor Voss across the face. Emma told herself it was a coincidence, a billing error. These things happened. She'd sort it out later. Right now, she had bigger concerns because she needed to get to work. And without a phone, she couldn't call ahead, so she just got dressed and caught the bus and showed up at the office like she did every Monday. The receptionist wouldn't look at her. That was the first sign. Marcy, who'd shared 100 coffees with Emma, who'd covered for her when she was late because of her father, Marcy looked at her computer screen like it held the secrets of the universe and would not meet Emma's eyes. "Hey, Marce," Emma said. "Is Dave in? I couldn't call, my phone's acting up." "He's in his office," Marcy said quietly, still not looking up. "He's expecting you." That was the second sign, because nobody expected Emma. Emma was the person who made things happen so that other people could be expected. And the way Marcy said it, with that flat, careful voice, made the worm in Emma's stomach uncoil into something bigger. Dave Reynolds had run the event company for 15 years. He was a decent man, in a nervous, sweaty sort of way, the kind of boss who genuinely cared about his people, but cared about his business more. When Emma walked into his office, he was standing behind his desk instead of sitting, which she'd never seen before, and there was an envelope in his hand. "Emma," he said, "sit down." "I'll stand, thanks." "Dave, what's going on? My phone got shut off. Marcy's acting weird and you're expecting me. What is this?" Dave set the envelope down on the desk and pushed it toward her with one finger, like it was hot. "I have to let you go," he said. The words didn't make sense at first. Emma actually laughed, a short, confused sound. "Let me go? Dave, I ran the whole Whitfield Gala Saturday, 400 people, and it went perfect. You told me yourself it was the best event we've done all year." "It was," Dave said miserably. "You did a beautiful job. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Dave sank into his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up, his eyes were pleading, like he was begging her to understand something he couldn't say out loud. "I got a call this morning," he said. "Early, before I even had my coffee, from someone very important. And this person made it very clear that if you continued to work for this company, we would never work in this city again. No more venues, no more contracts, no more permits. He said he'd have every door in Chicago closed to us by Friday." Dave's voice cracked. "Emma, I've got 12 people on payroll, 12 families. I can't fight someone like that. I can't. I'm so sorry." Emma felt the floor shift under her. "Who called you?" "I can't say." "Dave, who called you?" "You know who," he whispered. "You know exactly who. What did you do, Emma? What in God's name did you do to Victor Voss?" There it was, the name. And the way Dave said it, the way his hands shook when he said it, told Emma everything Rose had tried to warn her about. This wasn't a rich man with a bruised ego. This was something else entirely. "I told him to stop hurting an old woman," Emma said numbly. "That's what I did." Dave closed his eyes. "Of all the people in this city, of all the people you could have crossed." He slid the envelope closer to her. "There's 2 weeks' pay in there. It's more than I can afford, but it's the least I could do. Take it. And Emma?" He looked at her with genuine fear. "Be careful, please. Men like that, they don't stop at your job." Emma took the envelope. Her hands were steady, but inside she felt like she was falling. "Thanks, Dave," she managed. "You've been good to me. I don't blame you." She walked out past Marcy, who finally looked up, her eyes wet, and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Emma nodded and kept walking, out the door, into the cold, and she stood on the sidewalk for a long moment just trying to breathe. One job. It was just one job. She'd find another. She was good at what she did, and there were a dozen event companies in Chicago. She'd have a new position by the end of the week. She was wrong about that, too. Over the next 3 days, Emma applied to every event company, every catering firm, every hotel and venue in the city. She had a strong resume and glowing references, and in a normal week, she would have had 3 interviews lined up by Wednesday. Instead, she got nothing. Worse than nothing. She'd send an application in the morning and get a rejection by afternoon, sometimes within the hour, always the same polite, empty language. "We've decided to move in a different direction. The position has been filled. We'll keep your resume on file." By the 3rd day, she stopped pretending it was coincidence. Somebody was making calls. Somebody was closing every door before she could even reach for the handle. And she knew exactly who. Then came Thursday, and Thursday was when it stopped being about her. She came home from another day of pounding the pavement to find a notice taped to her apartment door. Official looking, printed on heavy paper. She read it 3 times before it sank in. The building had been sold. New ownership was terminating month-to-month leases effective in 30 days. She had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Emma stood in the hallway with her key in her hand and felt something like panic clawing up her throat. 30 days. Where were they going to go? Her father couldn't just be moved. He had equipment, a routine, a home health aide who came 3 times a week. And how was she supposed to pay for a new place with no job and no income, and a father who needed round-the-clock care? She let herself in and found her father sitting up in his chair by the window, and she forced a smile onto her face because she'd gotten good at that, at hiding the fear so he wouldn't worry. "Hi, Dad. How was your day?" But Frank Carter was holding the cordless phone in his lap, and his face was gray, grayer than the illness had ever made it, and Emma's forced smile died. "Dad, what's wrong?" "The hospital called," he said quietly. "The financial office." The panic in Emma's throat turned to ice. "They said the assistance program that was covering my treatments has been discontinued," Frank went on, his voice unnaturally calm, the calm of a man trying very hard not to fall apart. "Effective immediately. They said if we can't pay out of pocket, they'll have to stop the treatments. The chemo, the medications, all of it." He looked up at her, and his eyes were terrified, and Emma had never in her life seen her father look so afraid. "Emma, what's happening? First your job, now this? What is going on?" And that was the moment Emma understood fully and finally the size of what she was up against. This wasn't punishment for the slap. This wasn't a rich man teaching her a lesson. This was total war. Victor Voss wasn't just closing doors. He was systematically dismantling her entire life, piece by piece, taking her job, her home, and now, most cruelly of all, her father's medicine, her father's life. He'd found the exact thing that mattered most to her in the entire world, and he'd reached out and put his hand around it. She'd slapped him, and this was his answer. Not a slap back. Annihilation. "It's going to be okay, Dad," Emma said, and she didn't recognize her own voice. "I'm going to fix it. I promise. Just don't worry about it. Let me handle it." She went into her room and sat down on the edge of her bed and shook for a long time, and she did not let him hear her cry. That night a car came. Emma heard it before she saw it. The low, expensive purr of an engine that didn't belong on her street. She went to the window and looked down, and there it was, a long black car gleaming under the streetlight, rain sliding off its polished surface. It sat there, idling, and Emma knew with absolute certainty that it had come for her. She thought about not going down. She thought about locking the door and pretending she hadn't seen it. But she knew that wouldn't stop anything. Men like Victor Voss didn't go away because you ignored them. And besides, some furious, reckless part of her wanted to face him, wanted to look him in the eye and ask him how a grown man could be so small, so cruel, that he'd take medicine away from a dying man over a slap. She pulled on her coat and went downstairs. A man was waiting by the car. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with a calm, watchful face and a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Emma's rent. He opened the rear door as she approached. "Miss Carter, Mr. Voss would like to speak with you." "Would he?" Emma said. "How generous of him." "You can tell Mr. Voss that if he wants to speak with me, he can come do it himself, instead of sending a man in a nice suit to fetch me like a dog." The man's expression didn't change. "I understand your frustration, but I'd strongly encourage you to get in the car." "And if I don't? Then things will continue the way they've been going," the man said, not unkindly. "And I don't think you want that, do you?" Emma stared at him. The rain was soaking through her coat. Somewhere above her, in that little apartment, her father was lying awake, wondering how they were going to survive. And the only person who could turn all of it off, the job, the apartment, the medicine, was sitting in a mansion somewhere waiting for her to come to him. "My father needs his treatments," Emma said. Her voice broke on the word father, just slightly, and she hated herself for it. "Whatever this is, whatever game he's playing, tell me right now. Can he give my father his medicine back? Because if he can't, I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, something like sympathy flickered across the man's face. "Get in the car, Miss Carter," he said quietly. "I think you'll find that Mr. Voss can give you a great many things, if you're willing to listen." Emma got in the car. The drive took nearly an hour. The city fell away behind them, replaced by dark highways and then darker country roads, and Emma watched the rain streak across the window and tried to prepare herself for whatever was coming. She didn't know what Victor Voss wanted. She'd assumed he wanted to gloat, to watch her beg, to enjoy her ruin up close. But the man in the front seat had said something strange. "He can give you a great many things," as if this were a negotiation, as if there were something on the table besides her destruction. The car finally turned through a set of iron gates and up a long drive, and Emma got her first look at the estate. It was enormous, a mansion that looked more like a fortress, with high walls and men stationed at the corners, men who watched the car pass with flat, professional eyes. This was not the home of a real estate developer. This was the stronghold of someone who had reasons to be afraid. She was led inside, through halls that swallowed her footsteps, and into a large study where a fire was burning. And there he was, Victor Voss, standing by the window with a glass in his hand, exactly the way he'd been standing the night he'd made his phone call, though, of course, Emma didn't know that. He turned when she entered. The mark she'd left on his face was long gone, but something in the way he looked at her told her he hadn't forgotten it. "Emma Carter," he said. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come," Emma said. "I was collected, like laundry." The corner of his mouth twitched. "You're angry." Angry. Emma took a step toward him, and one of the men by the door tensed, but Victor raised a hand, and the man went still. "You want to know what I am? I'm a woman whose father is going to die because you decided to punish me for having the nerve to tell you to stop hurting an old lady. You took my job. Fine. You took my apartment. Cruel but fine. But my father's medicine? His treatments?" Her voice was rising and she couldn't stop it. "He's sick. He's fighting for his life. And you reached into a hospital and pulled the plug on him because your feelings got hurt at a party. So don't ask me if I'm angry. Angry isn't a big enough word." Victor listened to all of it without moving, without flinching, his dark eyes fixed on her. When she finished, breathing hard, he set down his glass. "You're right," he said. Emma blinked. Of everything he might have said, that was the last thing she'd expected. "I'm what?" "You're right. What I did to your father was cruel. It was, in fact, the cruelest thing I could think of, which is precisely why I did it." He said it plainly, without a trace of shame, and somehow that honesty was more chilling than any excuse would have been. "I needed to get your attention. I needed to know that when I made you an offer, you would take it seriously. And there was no better way to make you take me seriously than to show you exactly what I'm capable of." "An offer," Emma repeated. "You destroyed my entire life to soften me up for an offer." "Yes. You're insane. You're actually insane." Emma laughed, a wild, disbelieving sound. Whatever your offer is, the answer is no. I don't care what it is. I would rather sleep on the street than take a single thing from you. Even if it means your father dies? The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She went silent. Victor watched her, and there was no cruelty in his face now, only a kind of cold, patient certainty, the certainty of a man who has already calculated exactly how this conversation will end. "Sit down, Emma," he said more gently. "Please, just hear me out. And then, if you still want to leave, my driver will take you home, and I'll turn everything back on. Your father's treatments, your apartment, all of it. Tonight. You have my word. Just listen first. That's all I ask." Emma didn't trust him, not for a second. But she'd heard him say he'd turn her father's treatments back on, and that single sentence was worth more to her than anything in the world. So she sat down in the chair across from him, on the very edge of it, ready to run. "Talk," she said. Victor was quiet for a moment, choosing his words, and when he spoke, everything Emma thought she understood about her situation shattered. "The name I gave you at the gala was Alexander Voss," he said. "That's the name I use in public, the name on the buildings, in the papers, at the parties, but it isn't my real name." He looked at her steadily. "My real name is Victor, and I am not a real estate developer, Emma. That's a costume. It's a very expensive, very convincing costume, but it's a costume all the same." "Then what are you?" "I run an organization," Victor said. "The kind of organization that doesn't appear in any registry, the kind that men like the ones who own the hospital, the ones who own your old company, answer to whether they admit it or not. Everything you experienced this week, the phone, the job, the apartment, the treatments, none of that required much effort on my part. A phone call here, a word there, because in this city, and several others, the things that seem to run on money and law actually run on me." He let that sink in. "Rose was right to be afraid. Your father is right to be afraid. You should be afraid too. The fact that you aren't is the most interesting thing about you." Emma's mouth had gone dry. She thought of the walls outside, the armed men, the fortress. Rose's voice came back to her. "People who cross him, they don't just lose their jobs, they disappear." "You're the Mafia," she said slowly. "You're telling me you're the Mafia." "I'm telling you I'm the reason the Mafia is afraid," Victor said. "But yes, that word will do." Emma should have been terrified. Part of her was. But a stubborn, exhausted part of her had passed beyond fear into something almost like clarity. She was sitting in the study of the most dangerous man in the Midwest, and he'd just confessed to being a criminal overlord, and the only thing she could think about was her father. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "You could have just made your offer. Why tell me who you really are?" "Because the offer requires you to know," Victor said. "I can't ask you to do what I need you to do without you understanding the world you'd be stepping into." He leaned forward, and for the first time, Emma saw past the coldness to the thing underneath it. And the thing underneath it was pressure, enormous, crushing pressure, the weight of a man carrying something too heavy for one person. "I have a problem, Emma, and strangely enough, you might be the solution to it." "What problem?" "There's another family," Victor said, "another organization, as powerful as mine in its own territory. For months they've been pushing for an alliance, and the way alliances are made in my world, they're sealed with a marriage." His jaw tightened. "They want me to marry the daughter of their leader, a woman I've met exactly twice. It would join our two empires into something no one could stand against. And it would also mean chaining myself for the rest of my life to a family I don't trust, in a marriage I never chose, all to prevent a war." "So marry her," Emma said. "What does that have to do with me?" "Because if I refuse, the war happens. Hundreds of people die, mine and theirs. And if I accept, I hand these people a key to everything I've built. And the moment they have it, they'll try to take the rest." Victor shook his head. "There's only one way out. If I'm already engaged, already promised to someone else, then I can decline their offer without insulting them. It becomes a matter of my heart, not my politics. They can't demand I break an existing engagement. It gives me the room I need." Emma was beginning to understand, and she didn't like where it was going. "You want a fake fiancé." "I want a fake fiancé," Victor confirmed. "Someone from outside this world, someone with no connection to any family, no debts, no loyalties that could be exploited. Someone who could stand beside me at the most dangerous tables in America and not flinch." He looked at her, and there was something almost like wonder in his eyes. "For 20 years, Emma, everyone I meet is afraid of me. Everyone wants something from me, or fears what I'll take from them. And then, at a charity gala, a waitress with holes in her shoes slaps me across the face in front of 400 people because I was rude to an old woman. You didn't know who I was. You still stood up. You still refused to back down." He shook his head slowly. "I have spent my entire life looking for someone I couldn't frighten. And there you were, carrying a clipboard. The room was very quiet. The fire popped and hissed. Emma sat frozen, trying to absorb the sheer madness of what was being asked of her. "You want me to pretend to be engaged to a mafia boss," she said, "to fool other mafia bosses, so you can avoid a war." "6 months, Victor said. "That's all I need. 6 months to maneuver, to make other arrangements, to make the alliance unnecessary. At the end of 6 months, we part ways, quietly and permanently. And in exchange." He paused. "In exchange, I will pay for every treatment your father needs, for as long as he needs it, with the best doctors in the country. I'll buy the building you live in and give you the deed so no one can ever put you out on the street again. And I will make sure that neither you nor anyone you love ever wants for anything for the rest of your lives. That's my offer, Emma. 6 months of your time in exchange for your father's life and your family's future." Emma couldn't breathe. It was everything. It was every single thing she needed, laid out in front of her like a feast in front of a starving woman. Her father's treatments, a home no one could take away, security, real security, the kind she'd never had a single day of her adult life. All of it, right there, close enough to touch. And all she had to do was walk into a world of guns and secrets and men who made people disappear and pretend to love the man who had spent the last week burning her life to the ground. "You're a monster," she whispered. "You know that? You took away my father's medicine to force me to the table, and now you're offering it back like it's a gift. That's not a gift. That's a hostage negotiation." "Yes," Victor said. He didn't deny it. He never denied anything, she was learning. "It is. I told you I'm not a good man, Emma. I've never pretended otherwise, but I'm offering you something real. Your father lives. Your family is safe, and you'll never have to count pennies at a pharmacy counter again." He tilted his head. "I know about the pharmacy counter. I know a great deal about you now. I know you've given up everything for him. I know you haven't bought yourself anything new in 2 years. I know you cry in hospital bathrooms so he won't hear you." His voice softened, just slightly. "I'm offering to make all of that stop. All you have to do is say yes." Emma stared at him, this terrible, honest, ruthless man who had studied her life like a map and found the one road that led straight to her heart. "And if I say no? Then you go home tonight and I turn everything back on, exactly as I promised. Your father gets his treatment. Your apartment is safe. I keep my word, Emma, even when it costs me. That's the one thing that separates me from the animals I deal with." He held her gaze. "But I won't be able to help you beyond that. And your father's illness is expensive. And the assistance program that was covering it, the one I discontinued, well, those programs are always being cut. Budgets change. Priorities shift. I couldn't promise it would be there next month or the month after." He spread his hands. "The world is a dangerous place for people without protection, Emma. I'm offering you protection, that's all." And there it was, the trap inside the gift. He'd turn everything back on, yes, but he'd made sure she understood how fragile it all was, how easily it could all vanish again, how completely her father's survival depended on the whims of a world that didn't care whether he lived or died. He wasn't just offering her a deal, he was showing her that she'd been living on the edge of a cliff her whole life, and that he was the only one with a rope. She hated him. She hated him with a purity that frightened her, but her father was going to die without those treatments, and Victor Voss was offering to save him. "I need to think," Emma said. "Of course." "No, I need to actually think. I'm not deciding the rest of my life in one night in your creepy fortress." She stood up. "Take me home. Turn my father's treatments back on tonight like you promised, and give me until tomorrow. If you're a man of your word like you keep saying, then prove it. Give me one night to decide whether to sell my soul to you." Victor studied her for a long moment. And then, slowly, he smiled. And this time it was almost a real smile. The smile of a man who had found something rare and knew it. "You're the first person in 20 years to make demands of me," he said. "Do you know that? Everyone else takes what I give them, and thanks me for it." He nodded. "One night. Your father's treatments will be restored before you're even home, and tomorrow you'll give me your answer." He picked up his glass again. "Good night, Emma Carter. Drive safe." The car took her home through the rain, and Emma sat in the back seat and shook, not from cold this time, but from the enormity of what she was being asked to decide. When she got upstairs, she found her father asleep, and on the kitchen counter, the cordless phone was blinking with a message. She played it. It was the hospital's financial office, a confused-sounding woman explaining that there had been a mistake, that Mr. Carter's assistants had been reinstated, that his treatments would continue as scheduled, that they were so sorry for the confusion. Emma sat down at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands. He'd done it, just like that. One night, and he'd already proven he could give her father back his life with a snap of his fingers, which meant he could take it away just as easily any time he wanted for the rest of their lives. That was the real message, not the reinstated treatments. The message was, "I hold your father's life in my hand now. I always will. The only question is whether you'll be my partner or my victim." She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table until dawn, turning it over and over. She thought about the man she'd met, the coldness of him, the honesty of him, the loneliness she thought she'd glimpsed underneath all that armor. She thought about the world he was inviting her into, the guns and the walls and the men with flat eyes. She thought about all the ways it could go wrong, all the danger, all the lies she'd have to tell. And then she went into her father's room in the gray morning light and watched him sleep, watched the slow, fragile rise and fall of his chest. This man who had raised her alone after her mother died, who had worked himself to the bone to give her a good life, who had laughed when she told him she'd slapped a rich man because it was the right thing to do. She couldn't lose him. She wouldn't. Not while there was anything in the world she could do to stop it. Even if the thing she had to do was make a deal with the devil himself. When the sun was fully up, Emma washed her face, put on her coat, and walked to the corner where the black car was already waiting, exactly as she'd known it would be. The driver opened the door. Emma got in. They drove back through the iron gates, back to the fortress, back to the study where the fire was already burning, and Victor Voss was already waiting, as if he'd never left, as if he'd been standing there all night knowing she would come. He turned when she entered. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask if she'd slept. He just looked at her and waited because he already knew. 6 months, Emma said. Her voice was steady now. The shaking was gone. Somewhere in the long dark hours at that kitchen table, she'd made her peace with it, or as much peace as a person could make with a thing like this. 6 months, and then I'm free. You save my father, you protect my family, and when it's done, I walk away, and I never see you again. Those are the terms. Those are the terms, Victor agreed. And I have conditions of my own, Emma said. You don't lie to me, not ever. I'm walking into your world blind, and the only way I survive it is if I can trust that what you tell me is true. You can be cruel, you can be cold, I don't care, but you don't lie to me. Agreed? Something shifted in Victor's expression, a flicker of surprise, and then something that might have been respect. Agreed, he said. Then we have a deal. Emma lifted her chin, the same way she had in the ballroom, the same defiant tilt that had started this whole impossible thing. God help me, we have a deal. Victor crossed the room. He held out his hand, and Emma Carter, 27 years old, an event manager from Chicago with holes in her shoes and a dying father and no idea what she was really getting herself into, reached out and shook the hand of the most dangerous man in the Midwest, sealing a bargain that would either save her family or destroy her completely. Neither of them knew in that moment that they had just made the most important decision of their lives. Neither of them knew that the fake engagement would become the realest thing either of them had ever felt. Neither of them knew about the betrayal that was already being planned in the shadows, or the gunfire that was coming, or the way this cold, ruthless man would one day throw his own body over hers to keep her alive. They only knew that the deal was struck. And as their hands clasped, Victor Voss looked into the eyes of the one woman in the world who wasn't afraid of him, and felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years, something he had no name for, something that would change everything. And Emma Carter looked back at the man who held her father's life in his hands, and told herself, with all the fierce determination she possessed, that no matter what happened in the next 6 months, no matter what she had to pretend, she would never, ever let herself feel anything for him at all. They were both about to find out how wrong they were. They moved her into the estate 3 days later. Emma had argued about it, of course. She'd wanted to stay in the apartment with her father, to keep her life the way it was. But Victor had explained, with that infuriating calm of his, that the whole thing only worked if the world believed it. A fiancé didn't live across town in a walk-up. A fiancé moved in. And so a moving truck arrived, and a home health aide was hired for her father, the best in the city, and Frank Carter was set up in a beautiful ground-floor suite, in a house Emma still couldn't quite believe was real, with a nurse on call around the clock and doctors who came to him instead of the other way around. Her father thought she'd taken a high-paying job as a personal event coordinator for a wealthy businessman. That was the story they'd agreed on. Emma hated lying to him. It sat in her chest like a stone. But when she saw the color coming back into his face, when she watched him eat a real meal for the first time in months, when the new doctors told her his numbers were improving, she made herself swallow the guilt. She'd made her deal with the devil, and this was what the devil had paid. Her father was getting better. Whatever else was true, that was true, and she held on to it. "You look tired," Frank said to her one evening, about a week in. He was sitting up in bed, and there was more strength in his voice than she'd heard in a long time. "This job, it's a lot, isn't it? This Mr. Voss works you hard." "It's fine, Dad. It's a good job." "He treats you well? This man?" Emma thought about the man who'd taken away his medicine to force her hand. "He's complicated," she said carefully. "But he keeps his promises. That's more than I can say for most people." Frank studied her the way he always did, like he could see the things she wasn't saying. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Of course," Emma lied and kissed his forehead and went to learn how to be a Mafia boss's fiancé. Because that was the other half of the bargain, and it turned out to be harder than she'd imagined. It wasn't enough to move in and wear a ring. She had to be convincing. She had to walk into rooms full of the most dangerous people in America and look like she belonged on Victor Voss's arm, and that took work. Victor was a relentless teacher. In the mornings, he drilled her on names and faces, an endless parade of them, the heads of families and their lieutenants, their alliances and their grudges, who could be trusted and who couldn't, which of course was almost none of them. In the afternoons, he taught her how to hold herself, how to speak, how to say a great deal while revealing nothing. He taught her which fork to use at dinners, where the wrong fork could be read as an insult, and an insult could start a war. He taught her how to smile at a man while knowing that same man had killed people. "You're doing it again," he said one afternoon, watching her practice. "Doing what?" "Being kind." He said it like a flaw. "When Moretti's wife spoke to you last night, you asked about her children. You meant it. She could see you meant it." "So? She was nice. She showed me pictures. What was I supposed to do? Ignore her?" "You were supposed to be pleasant and distant. Warmth is a weakness in that world, Emma. It's a thing people use against you. The moment they know you care about something, they know how to hurt you." He shook his head. "You have to learn to stop caring about people, at least out there, at least where they can see it." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Is that what you did? Learn to stop caring?" Something crossed his face, quick as a shadow. "Yes." "And how's that working out for you?" she asked quietly. "Being a man who cares about nothing, living in a fortress with armed men on the walls, married to no one, trusting no one, so alone you had to blackmail a waitress into pretending to be your fiancé because you don't have a single real person in your life?" She held his gaze. "You're not teaching me to survive, Victor. You're teaching me to be as lonely as you are. And I won't do it. I'll learn your forks and your names and your rules. But I won't stop caring about people. That's the one thing you can't take from me." Victor said nothing. But that night, Emma noticed, he didn't correct her when she asked the kitchen staff about their families, and she caught him watching her do it with an expression she couldn't quite read. The first real test came 2 weeks in, at a dinner at the estate. Victor had explained it beforehand. The other family, the Genovese organization, was sending a representative to feel him out, to gauge whether the marriage alliance was still possible. Emma's job was simple: be his fiancé, be believable, give them no reason to doubt that Victor Voss was a man in love, and therefore a man who could not possibly marry their leader's daughter. "Salvatore Genovese is sending his consigliere," Victor told her while she got ready. "A man named Bruno. He's smart. He's careful, and he will be watching you every second, looking for the crack, the thing that gives us away. So whatever happens tonight, you don't break character. Not for a moment. Do you understand?" "I understand." If he suspects the engagement is fake, it doesn't just fail. It's an insult. It tells them I found the idea of marrying their daughter so repugnant that I'd rather lie than do it. That's the kind of insult that gets people killed, Emma. You, your father, everyone in this house. He looked at her seriously. "So I need you to be perfect tonight. Can you do that?" Emma's stomach was in knots, but she thought about her father sleeping peacefully downstairs, and she nodded. "I can do that." Bruno Genovese was exactly as advertised, a small, neat man with eyes that missed nothing, and from the moment he arrived, Emma felt those eyes on her, probing, testing. He was charming at dinner, telling stories, asking questions, and every question was a small trap. How did you two meet? How long have you known each other? What is it you love about Victor? And Emma answered all of them, weaving the story she and Victor had built. And she watched Bruno watch her, and she couldn't tell if he believed her. Then, over dessert, Bruno set down his fork and smiled a smile with no warmth in it. "You know," he said, "it's a strange thing. Salvatore was so certain that Victor would be pleased by the match with his daughter. And then, out of nowhere, an engagement to a woman no one has ever heard of. A woman who, I'm told, was working as an event planner just a few weeks ago." He tilted his head. "One might almost think the timing was convenient. One might almost think this engagement appeared precisely when it was needed, to avoid a marriage Victor didn't want." The table went silent. Emma felt Victor tense beside her, though his face gave away nothing. This was it. This was the moment. Bruno had thrown the accusation onto the table, and how Emma responded in the next 10 seconds would determine whether they walked away from this or whether it turned into a war. And Emma, who was terrified, who had never done anything like this in her life, did the only thing she knew how to do. She told a version of the truth. "You're right," she said. Victor's hand went still on the table. Bruno's eyebrows rose. "The timing is convenient," Emma continued, meeting Bruno's eyes without blinking. "Do you want to know what actually happened, Mr. Genovese? I'll tell you, because I'm tired of everyone dancing around it. I met Victor at a charity gala. I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just some rich, arrogant man being cruel to a waitress, so I told him to stop." She let that sit for a moment. "And when he grabbed my arm, I slapped him. In front of 400 people. Ask anyone who was there. It's the talk of the city." Bruno's careful expression flickered. This clearly he had not been briefed on. "You slapped Victor Voss," he said slowly. "I did. And do you know what he did?" Emma turned and looked at Victor, and she let something show in her face, something warm and real. And she was half acting and half not, and she couldn't have told you where one ended and the other began. "He didn't have me killed. He didn't ruin me. He looked at me like I was the first interesting thing he'd seen in years, because I was the only person in that whole room who wasn't afraid of him. Everyone else in Victor's life is afraid of him, mister." "Genovese, You're afraid of him right now, but I never was. And that's why he loves me. Not because the timing was convenient, because for the first time in 20 years, someone looked at him and saw a man instead of a monster. The silence after that was absolute. Even Victor was staring at her. And Bruno Genovese, the careful man with the searching eyes, slowly began to smile. A real smile this time. "Well," he said, "that is not a story anyone could invent." He picked up his wine glass and raised it to Emma. "Salvatore will be disappointed, but I think even he will understand. A man does not walk away from a woman who slapped him and live to tell about it." He drank. "You are either exactly what you appear to be, Miss Carter, or you are the most dangerous woman I have ever met, and I have met some very dangerous women." Later, after Bruno had gone, Victor found Emma on the terrace where she'd fled to breathe. Her hands were still shaking with the adrenaline of it. "You told him the truth," Victor said. "I told him a true story. There's a difference." "You said I love you." His voice was strange. "You looked right at me, and you told him I love you, and he believed it." Bruno Genovese, who has spent 40 years learning to spot a lie, believed it completely. He was quiet for a moment. "How did you do that?" Emma didn't answer right away, because the honest answer was that she didn't entirely know. In that moment, looking at Victor, telling Bruno the story of the slap and the loneliness and the man behind the monster, she hadn't been sure how much of it was performance. She'd meant more of it than she wanted to admit. "I'm a good liar when I have to be," she said finally. "Turns out." But that wasn't it, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. The weeks turned into a month, and then 2. And something was happening that neither of them had planned for. Emma was getting to know him. Not the Mafia boss, not the millionaire, but the man. She saw him in the early mornings before the mask went on, drinking coffee alone in the kitchen, and she started joining him, and they'd talk, actually talk, about nothing and everything. She learned that he read constantly, history mostly, and poetry, which surprised her. She learned that he'd inherited the organization at 23 when his father was killed, that he'd never wanted it, that he'd walked into a war he didn't start and had been fighting to keep everyone alive ever since. She learned that under all that armor was a man who was so tired, so profoundly and bone-deep tired of being feared. And Victor was getting to know her too. He watched her sit with her father for hours. He watched her charm his terrifying kitchen staff into loving her. He watched her stand up to men who could have killed her without a second thought, over and over, never backing down, always for someone weaker than herself. And he found himself, for the first time in his adult life, wanting to be in a room simply because she was in it. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said one night. They were in the study, the fire going, both of them reading, and it had become a habit, these quiet evenings, without either of them ever deciding it should. "The men who work for you, the ones on the walls, are they good people?" Victor lowered his book. "That's a complicated question." "Try. Some of them," he said. "Some of them came to me because they had nowhere else to go. Marco, the one who drove you that first night, he had a daughter with a heart condition and no way to pay for the surgery. I paid for it. Now he'd take a bullet for me, and I'd take one for him." He set the book aside. "That's how it works, Emma. It's not what people think. It's not just violence and money. It's loyalty. It's people who the world threw away, finding a place. I know what I am. I know what my organization does, but some of these men would be dead or in prison without me. That has to count for something, doesn't it?" Emma considered him. "You want it to count for something, because you need to believe you're not just a monster." "Yes," Victor said quietly. "I suppose I do." "You're not," Emma said, and she surprised herself by meaning it. "A monster wouldn't pay for a man's daughter's surgery. A monster wouldn't lie awake worrying about starting a war that would get his people killed. A monster wouldn't read poetry." She smiled a little. "You've done monstrous things. That's not the same as being a monster. There's still a person in there, Victor. I've seen him." Victor looked at her across the firelit room, and something passed over his face that she'd never seen before, something raw and unguarded, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "You should be careful, Emma," he said finally, and his voice was rough, "talking to me like that." "Why?" "Because you're the only person alive who talks to me like I'm a man worth saving, and I'm not sure I remember how to hear that without wanting more of it." He stood abruptly, setting down his glass. "Good night." And he left. And Emma sat alone by the fire, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear, and she thought about the promise she'd made herself the day they shook hands, that no matter what happened, she would never let herself feel anything for him. She was already breaking it. She'd been breaking it for weeks, and she didn't know how to stop. The days after that were charged with something new, an awareness that hummed between them whenever they were in the same room. Neither of them spoke of it. Emma told herself it was just proximity, just the strange intimacy of the lie they were living, that it would fade. Victor told himself he was a man who had learned long ago that wanting things was a weakness and that he would not, could not, want this. They were both lying to themselves, and they were both terrible at it. It came to a head at the Kessler wedding. A daughter of one of the Allied families was getting married, and the whole underworld would be there, and Victor and Emma had to attend as the engaged couple. It was, Victor warned her, the most watched event of the season. Every eye would be on them. They had to be perfect. And they were. They danced, and Emma had learned to dance by then, and Victor held her, and for the length of one song, in front of 500 of the most dangerous people in America, they forgot they were pretending. Emma looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and the music played, and something in both of them just quietly gave way. "You're not acting right now," Victor murmured. "Are you?" "No," Emma admitted. "Are you?" "No." And that was all. Neither of them said anything more. But when the song ended, Victor didn't let go of her hand right away, and Emma didn't pull it back, and both of them knew that a line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. It should have been the happiest moment of the whole strange arrangement. Instead, it was the moment everything began to fall apart. Because across the ballroom, watching them with cold, calculating eyes, was Victor's oldest friend, his right hand, the man he trusted more than anyone alive. Dominic Reyes had stood beside Victor for 15 years, had bled for him, had helped him hold the organization together through a dozen crises. Victor would have said, without hesitation, that Dominic was the one man on earth he could trust completely. Victor was wrong about that, catastrophically wrong, because Dominic Reyes had spent those 15 years watching Victor sit in the chair Dominic believed should have been his. He'd swallowed it, year after year, hidden it behind loyalty and smiles. But something had curdled in him a long time ago, and now, watching Victor dance with a woman he actually seemed to care about, Dominic understood something. For 15 years, Victor had been untouchable, because Victor cared about nothing and no one. You couldn't hurt a man who had no weaknesses. But now Victor had one. Now Victor had two, actually. Emma. And the fact that, for the first time, Victor Voss had something to lose. Dominic smiled and raised his glass across the room, and Victor, not knowing, raised his in return. The betrayal was already in motion. Emma just didn't know it yet. She found out 3 weeks later, though she didn't understand what she was seeing at first. She'd gone looking for Victor late one night and heard voices from his study, low and urgent. And she'd stopped outside the door, not meaning to eavesdrop, but catching Dominic's voice. "The meeting's set," Dominic was saying. "The old warehouse on Cicero, Thursday night. Just you and a few men, like they asked. It's the only way they'll agree to talk about backing off the alliance." "And you're sure about this?" Victor said. "Would I steer you wrong? 15 years, Vic. Have I ever once led you wrong?" There was a pause. "No," Victor said. "You never have. That's why you're the only one I trust with something like this." Emma moved away from the door before she could be caught, and she told herself it was nothing, just business, the kind of thing she wasn't meant to understand. But something about Dominic's voice had made the hair on her arms stand up. There had been something underneath it, something too smooth, too rehearsed. She didn't sleep well that night, and in the morning, over coffee, she asked Victor about it. This meeting Thursday, the one Dominic set up, is it dangerous? Victor looked at her sharply. How do you know about that? I heard you two talking last night. I wasn't trying to. Is it dangerous? Everything I do is dangerous, Victor said. But no more than usual. It's a negotiation. Dominic arranged it. If Dominic set it up, it's solid. He's the one man I'd trust with my life. Are you sure about that? Something in her tone made Victor go still. What are you saying, Emma? She hesitated. She didn't have anything concrete, just a feeling, a prickle at the back of her neck, the same instinct that had made her turn around at the gala. I don't know. Something about the way he talked last night. It felt off, too smooth, like he was reading from a script. Dominic has been my closest friend for 15 years, Victor said, and there was an edge in his voice now, a warning. He helped me bury my father. He's taken bullets for me. I understand you're not from this world, Emma, but there are some things you have to leave to the people who are. Dominic is not something you need to worry about. I'm not worried about Dominic, Emma said. I'm worried about you. There's a difference. Victor's expression softened, just slightly, but he shook his head. Your instincts are good. They're better than good, but they're wrong about this. Trust me. And Emma let it go, because what else could she do? She wasn't part of that world. She didn't have proof. She had a feeling, and in Victor's world, a feeling from an outsider wasn't worth the war it might start to act on it. She would spend the rest of her life wishing she'd pushed harder. Thursday came, and that evening, as Victor prepared to leave for the warehouse on Cicero, Emma stopped him at the door. She didn't know why. She just couldn't shake the feeling that had been building in her chest all week, a cold dread that had no name. Don't go, she said. Victor turned, surprised. Emma, I know it doesn't make sense. I know I'm just the fake fiancé who doesn't understand your world. But I'm asking you, please, don't go tonight. Her voice cracked. I have a bad feeling. The worst feeling I've ever had. Please, Victor, stay. He crossed to her and, in a gesture that startled them both, took her face in his hands. It was the first time he'd ever touched her like that, gently, tenderly, and Emma's breath caught. Listen to me, he said softly. Nothing is going to happen. I've done 100 meetings like this, and I have Dominic watching my back, and men I trust. He searched her face. But I'll tell you something. In 20 years, no one has ever asked me to stay. No one has ever cared whether I came home. His thumb brushed her cheek. You have no idea what it means to me that you do. Then stay, she whispered. If it means that much, then stay. For me. For a moment, she thought he might. She saw him waver. She saw the war in his eyes. And then his phone buzzed, and the mask came back down, and he stepped away from her. I have to go, he said. But Emma, when I get back, we need to talk about this, about us, because I don't think either of us is pretending anymore, and I'm tired of lying about it. He picked up his coat. When I get back, I promise. And he walked out this door into the night, toward the warehouse on Cicero, toward the meeting his oldest friend had arranged, and Emma stood in the doorway with her heart in her throat, watching the taillights of his car disappear down the long, dark drive, unable to shake the certainty that she had just made a terrible mistake by letting him go. She was right. 2 hours later, her phone rang. It was Marco, the driver, and his voice was ragged, breathless, wrong. Miss Carter, it's a trap. It was always a trap. They were waiting for us. They knew everything. They knew where we'd be and how many men and when. Somebody told them. Somebody on the inside. A burst of static, and underneath it, a sound Emma would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. Gunfire. It's Dominic. God help us, it was Dominic all along. He set the whole thing up. He's trying to kill Victor and take everything, and we're pinned down, and there's too many of them, and... The line went dead. Emma stood in the great empty house with the silent phone in her hand, and she understood too late that every instinct she'd had was right. That the man Victor trusted most had betrayed him. That the meeting was an execution. And that the man she'd sworn she'd never let herself feel anything for was at this very moment fighting for his life in a warehouse across the city with a traitor's bullet already fired in his direction. And she realized in that shattering moment, with a clarity that took the breath right out of her, that she was in love with him. She'd been lying to herself for weeks. She wasn't lying anymore. She grabbed her coat and ran for the door. She didn't get 10 feet out the door before Marco's men stopped her. 2 of them, appearing out of the dark like they'd been waiting, and one of them caught her by the shoulders and held her fast, even as she fought to get past him. "Miss Carter, you can't go out there. Let go of me, he's dying out there, let me go. You going out there gets you killed, and it doesn't save him." The man's grip was iron. "Marco called us before he called you. We've got men rolling to Cicero right now, the best we have. If Victor can be saved, they'll save him. But you go running into a firefight, all you do is give Dominic exactly what he wants. A second hostage. Do you understand me? You're the one thing that would make Victor stop fighting. If they get you, he stops. He surrenders. And then they kill him for sure." Emma went still in his hands. Because it was true, and she knew it was true. And it was the worst kind of true, the kind that traps you. "Then what do I do?" she said, and her voice broke completely. "Tell me what to do. I can't just stand here. I can't." "You wait," the man said. "God help us. That's all any of us can do right now. You wait." So Emma waited. She waited in that enormous, silent house, pacing the length of the study where she and Victor had spent all those quiet evenings. And every minute was an hour, and every hour was a lifetime. She thought about the last thing he'd said to her. "When I get back, we need to talk. About us. Because I don't think either of us is pretending anymore." And she'd let him walk out the door anyway. She'd felt it in her bones, the wrongness of it, and she'd let him go. If he died out there, that would be the last thing between them. A door closing, taillights disappearing. She went to check on her father at some point, because she couldn't fall apart in front of him. And she stood in his doorway watching him sleep. This man she'd sold her soul to save. And she thought about how strange it was that saving one man she loved had led her straight into loving another. She didn't say any of that out loud. She just watched him breathe, and then she went back to the study to wait some more. It was almost 4 a.m. when the cars came up the drive. Emma heard the engines and ran to the front of the house, and her heart was going so hard she thought it might burst, and the doors opened, and men climbed out, bloodied, limping, carrying others. And for one horrible moment she couldn't find him in the chaos, couldn't see him anywhere, and the whole world narrowed to a single unbearable question. And then she saw him. Victor. Alive. On his feet, barely, with Marco under one arm holding him up, his shirt soaked dark with blood, his face gray with pain and exhaustion, but alive, walking, breathing. Emma made a sound she'd never made before, half sob and half something wordless, and she ran to him, and Victor lifted his head and saw her coming, and something in his ruined face just broke open. "Emma," he said, and it came out cracked. "You're here. You waited." "You're bleeding. Oh God, you're bleeding. We have to." She had her hands on him, frantic, trying to find the wound, trying to hold him up. And Victor caught one of her hands in his. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said. Went through the shoulder, missed everything that matters. A grimace that was almost a smile. "I've had worse." "Don't you dare joke right now. Don't you dare." Emma was crying, and she didn't care. "You almost died. You almost died, and the last thing I did was let you walk out that door when every part of me was screaming not to." They got him inside, and a doctor was already there, one of Victor's people, and Emma refused to leave the room while they worked on him. She held his good hand the entire time, and Victor held hers back, and neither of them let go. When it was done, when the shoulder was cleaned and stitched and bound, and the doctor had gone, and it was just the 2 of them in the dim room, Victor finally said the thing that had been sitting between them all night. "You were right," he said quietly, "about Dominic. You told me. You looked at me across that kitchen table, and you told me something was wrong, and I didn't listen. Because I was so sure. 15 years, Emma. 15 years I trusted that man with my life, and you saw through him in one conversation." He closed his eyes. "He walked us into that warehouse to die. He was there at the end, standing with the Genovese men who were supposed to be negotiating. He looked me in the eye while his people tried to kill me, and he smiled. But he didn't kill you, Emma said. You got out. Marco got me out, and half the men who went in didn't come back. Victor's jaw tightened, and Emma saw the grief under the rage, real grief, for men he'd known for years. They died because I didn't listen to you, because I trusted the wrong man and doubted the right woman. You couldn't have known. You knew. Victor opened his eyes and looked at her, and there was something naked in his face, something she'd never been allowed to see before. That's the thing, Emma. You knew. You've known things about me from the beginning that took me 20 years to learn about myself. And I keep pushing you away, because letting you in terrifies me more than any warehouse full of men with guns. And tonight I almost died with the truth still stuck in my throat. He gripped her hand tighter. So I'm going to say it now while I still can, in case there's another warehouse, in case I don't get another chance. Emma couldn't breathe. Victor, I love you, he said. It stopped being pretend a long time ago. Somewhere between you slapping me at that gala and you standing in that doorway begging me to stay, it became the only real thing in my life. I love you, Emma Carter. And I don't know how to do this. I've never loved anyone. I don't know how to be a person someone loves back. But I know I don't want to spend one more day pretending I don't feel this. And Emma, who had promised herself so fiercely that she would never let herself feel anything for this man, leaned down and kissed him. It was gentle, careful of his wounds, and it was the truest thing she'd ever done. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his and let herself say it too. I love you, she said. I've been in love with you for weeks and I've been too scared and too stubborn to admit it. When Marco called and said you were pinned down, I ran for the door. Your men had to stop me. I would have run straight into that warehouse to get to you. She laughed shakily. So much for never feeling anything. So much for walking away at 6 months. Victor's hand came up to her face. Then don't walk away. I'm not going anywhere, Emma said. Not now. Not while there's a traitor out there who tried to kill you. You're stuck with me, Victor Voss. We're in this together now. All of it. But even as she said it, both of them knew that loving each other had solved nothing about the danger they were in. Dominic was still out there. Dominic had shown his hand and failed to kill Victor, which made him more dangerous, not less, because a betrayer who fails has no choice but to try again. And now he'd allied himself with the Genovese family, which meant Victor wasn't facing one enemy but two, and he was doing it wounded, with half his men dead, at the weakest he'd been in 15 years. He's going to come again, Victor said, as if reading her thoughts. Dominic, he has to now. He's committed. He can't leave me alive, because as long as I'm breathing, I'm coming for him. So he'll hit us again, harder, and soon, before I can recover. He tried to sit up and winced. I need to get ahead of him. I need to move first. You need to heal first, Emma said firmly. You can't fight anyone like this. You can barely sit up. I don't have the luxury of healing, Emma. In my world, weakness is an invitation. The second word gets out that I'm wounded, that Dominic nearly took me. Every enemy I've ever made will start circling. I have days, maybe less. He looked at her. This is the part of my life I never wanted you to see. The blood, the violence. This is what I am underneath all of it. Are you sure you want to be here for this? Emma thought about it. She thought about her father sleeping down the hall, the treatments keeping him alive, the deal that had brought her into this world. She thought about the man in front of her, wounded and hunted, and finally honest. And she made a choice, and it was hers, freely made, not part of any bargain. I'm sure, she said. But Victor, listen to me. There's another way. There has to be. She took his hand. You keep saying weakness is an invitation, that you have to hit Dominic first, harder, that the only language your world understands is violence. But look where that's gotten you. 15 years of ruling through fear, and the man you trusted most still turned on you, because fear isn't loyalty. Fear is just waiting for its chance. She squeezed his hand. What if you did it differently? What if you got out ahead of Dominic, not with more guns, but with something he can't fight? And what's that? The truth, Emma said. You said the Genovese family sided with Dominic. But do they know what he really is? Do they know he betrayed the man he served for 15 years? Because if I were Salvatore Genovese, I'd be asking myself a question. If Dominic would stab Victor Voss in the back after 15 years of loyalty, how long before he does the same to me? Victor went very still, and Emma watched the idea land, watched it catch, watched his tactical mind seize it and turn it over. "You want me to turn them against each other," he said slowly. "I want you to show Salvatore who he's really in business with. Dominic's whole value to him is that he could deliver you. Well, he didn't. You're alive. So now Dominic's just a traitor with a target on his back and no organization of his own. He needs Salvatore more than Salvatore needs him. And a man that desperate, that exposed?" Emma shook her head. "He's not an ally. He's a liability. You don't have to kill Dominic, Victor. You just have to make Salvatore realize that keeping him alive is more dangerous than cutting him loose." Victor stared at her for a long moment, and then, despite the pain, despite everything, he started to laugh, a low, incredulous laugh. "You've been in my world for 2 months, he said. 2 months, and you just outmaneuvered a strategy I've been running for 15 years. He shook his head in wonder. "You're right. You're completely right. I've been thinking like a soldier when I should have been thinking like you. My God, Emma, where were you 20 years ago?" "Planning charity galas," Emma said. "Now shut up and let me help you not die." Over the next 3 days, while Victor's shoulder began to knit, they worked. And it was a strange, exhilarating thing, the two of them at the table in his study, Victor teaching Emma the pieces on the board, and Emma teaching Victor to move them differently. She had a gift for it, an instinct he'd never seen, the ability to see 3 moves ahead, not by calculating force, but by understanding people, what they feared, what they wanted, where they'd break. They got word to Salvatore Genovese. Not a threat, not a demand, just information, delivered carefully through back channels. The truth about who Dominic really was and what he'd done. That he'd served Victor faithfully for 15 years and then sold him out the moment he saw a chance at the top chair. Emma helped craft the message, and the message was simple. This is the man you're trusting. This is what loyalty means to him. Ask yourself what he'll do to you. And then they waited to see if it would work. It was the 5th day when Marco came into the study with news, and his face was carefully blank in the way it got when something significant had happened. "Salvatore Genovese wants a meeting," he said. "Just him. Neutral ground. No Dominic." A pause. "And Vic? There's more. Word on the street is Dominic's gone to ground. Salvatore cut him loose 2 days ago. Threw him out. Dominic's got no family, no protection, no organization. He's on his own." Victor and Emma looked at each other. It had worked, exactly as Emma had said it would. Salvatore had looked at Dominic and seen not an asset, but a snake, and he'd done the math, and he'd decided that a man who'd betray one boss would betray another. "He'll come for you now," Emma said quietly. "Dominic, he's got nothing left to lose. That makes him more dangerous, not less. You said it yourself." "I know. So what do we do?" Victor was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised her. "We give him a way out." "What?" "You changed something in me, Emma. That night in the study, when you told me I wasn't a monster. I've been thinking about it ever since." He looked at her. 15 years ago, Dominic and I were like brothers. Something broke in him along the way, some jealousy I never saw, and it turned him into what he is now. And maybe that's my fault, partly. Maybe I made him feel small without ever knowing it, all those years of him standing behind my chair. I don't know. He shook his head. "But I'm tired, Emma. I'm tired of the blood. You showed me there's another way to win, and I'd rather win that way. So we're going to give Dominic a choice. He can leave, disappear, go somewhere far away and never come back, and live. Or he can keep coming and force my hand. But the choice will be his. I won't hunt a man down and put him in the ground if there's another way. Not anymore. Not since you." Emma felt her chest tighten with something enormous. "You mean that?" "I do. You're changing me, Emma, into something I didn't know I could still be." He took her hand. "The man who took away your father's medicine to force you to the table, that man is dying. You're killing him. and I'm grateful." The meeting with Salvatore happened 2 days later, and Emma insisted on going, and Victor, to his men's horror, agreed. And it was Emma, in the end, who sealed it. Because Salvatore Genovese was a hard, careful old man who'd survived 40 years in a business that killed almost everyone, and he'd come expecting to negotiate with a rival. Instead, he found Victor Voss, and beside him, a woman with steady eyes who looked him dead in the face and spoke to him plainly, without fear, the same way she'd once spoken to Victor at a charity gala. "You almost made a terrible mistake, Mr. Genovese," Emma told him. "You almost tied your family to a man who betrays the people who trust him. Victor's been at war his whole life because everyone in your world believes the only way to be safe is to be feared. But I'll tell you what I told him. Fear isn't loyalty. Dominic proved that. You want a real alliance? Build it on something a traitor can't touch. Build it on both of you being better off alive and at peace than dead and at war." She held his gaze. "There doesn't have to be a marriage. There doesn't have to be blood. There just has to be two smart men deciding they're done bleeding for nothing." Salvatore Genovese looked at her for a long, long moment, and then he looked at Victor. "Where did you find her?" he asked. "She found me," Victor said. "She slapped me at a party." And Salvatore Genovese, feared across the Midwest, threw back his head and laughed, and the war that had been coming for months quietly died right there at that table, killed not by guns, but by a woman who refused to believe that fear was the only language power could speak. They walked out with peace and understanding. No marriage, no alliance sealed in someone's blood, just two organizations agreeing to stay out of each other's way, sealed by the strangest thing Salvatore had encountered in 40 years, a mafia boss who'd rather talk than kill, and the woman who'd taught him how. It should have been over. It nearly was. But Dominic Reyes was still out there. And Dominic had been given his choice, the message delivered through the same channels, leave and live or keep coming and die. And for a few days it seemed he might take it. Word came that he'd been seen heading west, that maybe he'd chosen to disappear. And then, on a cold night 3 weeks later, Emma came home from visiting the hospital where Rose Miller, the waitress who'd started all of this, was recovering from a fall, and she walked into the house and knew immediately that something was wrong. The house was too quiet. The guard who should have been at the door wasn't there. She found Dominic in the study, waiting, with a gun in his hand, and Victor already at gunpoint across the room. "There she is," Dominic said softly. "The famous Emma, the woman who ruined everything." His eyes were wild, exhausted, the eyes of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "You know, before you, he was untouchable. No weaknesses, no one to protect. And then you came along and gave him a heart, and a heart is the easiest thing in the world to put a bullet through." "Dominic," Victor said, very calm, very careful. "Let her go. This is between you and me. It always was. Let her walk out that door, and you and I will finish this." "No," Dominic said. "No, I don't think so. Because I finally understand you now, Vic. For 15 years, I couldn't figure out how to really hurt you, because you didn't care about anything. But now," he turned the gun toward Emma, "now I know exactly how to make you suffer before you die." And in that frozen moment, with the gun pointed at the woman he loved, Victor Voss understood that everything he'd become, all the fear he'd built his life on, all the power, none of it could save the one thing that mattered. Only one thing could. "Wait," Victor said. "Dominic, wait, you want to hurt me? Fine, but not her. She's got nothing to do with what's between us. You want the man who made you feel small for 15 years? Here I am. Put the gun on me and let her go, and I swear to you, I won't fight it. I'll go down on my knees right now. Just let her live." "Victor, no," Emma started. "I mean it," Victor said. And he never took his eyes off Dominic, and slowly, slowly, he lowered himself to his knees, his wounded shoulders screaming, his hands open at his sides. "Look at me, Dominic, on my knees, the great Victor Voss. Is this what you wanted? Then take it. Take me. But she walks out that door first. That's the deal. That's the only deal." And Emma understood, in that terrible moment, that he meant it. that he would trade his life for hers without a second's hesitation, that the man who'd cared about nothing for 20 years would die on his knees to save her. She wasn't going to let him. "Dominic?" Emma said, and her voice was steady, and she stepped forward, putting herself between the two men, which made both of them freeze. "You've got it all wrong. You think killing me hurts him. You think killing him wins. But you're still doing exactly what you've always done. You're still measuring everything in blood and pain, and it's never once made you happy, has it? 15 years of standing behind his chair, eaten alive, and where did it get you? Alone, hunted, in a room with a gun, about to throw the last of your life away on revenge that won't fix anything." She held his gaze, and she poured everything she had into it. "You don't have to do this. You could put the gun down and walk out that door right now, and Victor would let you go. He already offered. That's the man he is now. So the only person keeping you in this room, the only person who still wants you dead, is you." Dominic's hand trembled. The gun wavered. And Emma saw, for just a moment, the man he might have been before the jealousy ate him alive. A tired man who'd made terrible choices and didn't know how to stop. "It's too late for me," Dominic whispered. "It's not," Emma said. "It's not too late until you pull that trigger. Put it down, Dominic, please. Nobody else has to die tonight." For one endless, agonizing moment, the whole world balanced on the edge of a knife. And then Dominic's arm dropped, the gun lowered, his face crumpled, and 15 years of poison seemed to drain out of him all at once, leaving behind just a broken man in an empty room. And that was the moment Victor's men, who had been silently moving into position, took him. It was over in seconds, the gun gone, Dominic on the ground, and no one had died, no one at all. Victor rose slowly from his knees and crossed to Emma and pulled her against him with his good arm, and she felt him shaking, this man who was never afraid, shaking like a leaf. "You put yourself between us," he breathed into her hair. "He had a gun on you, and you stepped toward him. Don't you ever, ever do that again." My heart stopped. Emma, my heart actually stopped. "It worked, didn't it?" "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point." She pulled back to look at him. "Nobody died, Victor. You didn't have to kill your oldest friend. I didn't have to watch you become that again. He's alive, you're alive, I'm alive. That's a win. That's what winning is supposed to look like." Victor looked down at her, at this impossible woman who'd walked into his world of blood and guns and refused, absolutely refused, to let it turn her into anything other than exactly what she was. And he understood that she'd done more than save his life tonight. She'd saved his soul. She'd shown him over and over that there was another way to be, and tonight, on his knees with a gun in his face, he'd finally believed it. "What do we do with him?" one of the men asked, meaning Dominic. Victor looked at the broken man on the floor for a long moment. The old Victor would have killed him, would have made an example of him. Instead, Victor said, "Let him go." The room went silent. "Vic, you heard me. He made his choice. He put the gun down. So we let him go and he disappears. And if he ever comes back, that's a different conversation. But tonight," Victor looked at Emma, "tonight, nobody else dies. We're done bleeding. All of us." And Dominic Reyes, who had come to kill and been shown mercy instead, was helped to his feet and walked out of that house a free man. And he looked back once, at Victor, at Emma, with an expression that was equal parts shame and disbelief. And then he was gone into the night, and none of them ever saw him again. Later, much later, when the house was quiet and her father was sleeping, and the danger had finally truly passed, Emma sat with Victor in the study by the fire, the way they had all those weeks, except now she was tucked against his good side, and his arm was around her, and there was nothing pretend about any of it. "The 6 months are almost up," she said softly. Victor's arm tightened around her. "I know. You promised me my freedom. When the 6 months ended, I'd be free to walk away, and my father would be safe forever, and I'd never have to see you again." She looked up at him. "That was the deal." "That was the deal," Victor agreed, and she heard the fear in his voice, the man who feared nothing, suddenly afraid of a single sentence. "I don't want it," Emma said. "The freedom. I don't want to walk away." She reached up and touched his face. the same cheek she'd slapped in a ballroom a lifetime ago. "I came into this to save my father, and I did. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being your prisoner and started being your partner, and I don't want that to end. I'm not staying because of a deal anymore, Victor. I'm staying because there's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be than right here with you." Victor Voss, the most feared man in the Midwest, closed his eyes and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 20 years. "When I made that deal," he said quietly, "I thought I was buying 6 months of a convincing lie. I never imagined I was buying the only real thing I'd ever have." He opened his eyes and looked at her. "You were supposed to save your father's life, Emma. I never told you the deal came with saving mine, too." And in the firelight, in the quiet, in the house that had finally stopped being a fortress and started being a home, they held each other, two people who'd found in the middle of all that darkness the one thing neither of them had ever believed they'd get: a second chance, and each other. 1 year later. Chicago had a way of forgetting things, but it never quite forgot Victor Voss. It just started remembering him differently. The name that had once been whispered in fear was now printed in the newspapers for entirely different reasons, and the people who read those stories couldn't quite believe them because the Victor Voss they were reading about didn't match the Victor Voss they'd been afraid of for 20 years. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had happened the way real change always happens, slowly, painfully, one hard choice at a time. In the weeks after Dominic walked out of that house a free man, Victor had sat down with Emma at the table in his study, the same table where they'd once plotted survival. And this time, they'd plotted something much harder, a way out, not out of danger, but out of the life itself. "You can't just quit the Mafia," Emma had said. "Can you? People don't just leave." "No," Victor had admitted. "People don't just leave. Usually they leave in a box. But I've been thinking about it for months, ever since you looked at me across this table and told me I wasn't a monster." He turned a pen over in his fingers, the way he did when he was working something out. "The organization isn't just crime, Emma. Underneath the ugly parts, it's businesses, real ones. Construction, shipping, real estate, restaurants. Those are legitimate, or they could be, if I cut away the rot. What if I don't leave? What if I take the whole thing and drag it into the light, piece by piece, until there's nothing left of the old world at all?" And that was what he had done. It had taken the better part of a year, and it had been more dangerous in its own way than any warehouse, because there were men in his organization who'd liked things the way they were, who made their money from the ugly parts and didn't want to give them up. Victor had faced them down one by one. Some he'd bought out, some he'd pushed out, a few had tried to fight, and those had been the hardest days, the days that tested whether he really meant it, whether the new Victor could hold the line without becoming the old one. Emma had been beside him through all of it, not hiding from it, not pretending it wasn't happening, but in it, helping him think, helping him find the path that didn't run through blood. When a man named Castellano had tried to rally the others against Victor's reforms, it had been Emma who'd figured out that Castellano's real problem wasn't the reforms at all, but the fear of being left with nothing. And it had been Emma's idea to offer him a legitimate stake in the new construction business instead of a war. Castellano had taken it. The rebellion had died before it started. "You're better at this than I am," Victor had told her one night, exhausted, amazed. "You keep finding the door I can't see." "That's because you keep looking for the door with force," Emma had said. "And I keep looking for the door with people. Everybody wants something, Victor. Usually it's not the thing they say they want. Castellano didn't want to fight you. He wanted to not be afraid. So I gave him a reason not to be afraid, that's all." By the time that year had passed, the transformation was nearly complete. The Voss organization, or what was left of it, had become something almost unrecognizable, a network of real, legitimate businesses that employed thousands of people, many of them the same men who'd once carried guns, now carrying tools and clipboards and lunch pails instead. Victor had done something no one in his world had ever done. He'd walked his entire empire out of the darkness and into the daylight, and somehow, against every prediction, he'd survived it. And Emma had built something of her own. It had started with Rose Miller. After the old waitress recovered from her fall, Emma had gone to visit her, and she'd found Rose worrying about money, about the medical bills, about whether she'd ever be able to work again at 70 years old. And something had crystallized in Emma in that moment, some understanding of what she was supposed to do with the strange, powerful life she'd stumbled into. "There are thousands of people like Rose," she told Victor, "people who spent their whole lives working, who did everything right, and who get thrown away the second they're not useful anymore. People who get screamed at by rich men for spilling a glass of wine. Nobody stands up for them. Nobody ever stands up for them." She'd looked at him with fire in her eyes, the same fire he'd fallen in love with. I want to be the person who stands up for them. I have the resources now. I have the connections. Let me use them for something good." And so the Carter Foundation had been born, named for her father, and its mission was simple: to protect and support the workers the world forgot. The waitresses and janitors and home health aides and dishwashers, the invisible people who kept the world running and got nothing for it. Emma poured herself into it. She set up a legal fund to defend workers who'd been mistreated. She created an emergency assistance program for people facing medical crises, like the one that had nearly destroyed her own family. She built a network of retraining and job placement for older workers who'd been pushed out. And she did it all with a fierceness that came from having lived it, from having counted pennies at a pharmacy counter, from having been the invisible woman with the clipboard that no one ever thanked. Rose Miller became the Foundation's first success story, and then its most beloved volunteer, spending her days helping other forgotten workers find their footing. Her apron traded for a foundation lanyard, her grandchildren's pictures now hanging in an office instead of tucked in a pocket. She never stopped telling anyone who'd listened the story of the young woman who'd slapped a millionaire to defend her. "That's her," Rose would say, pointing at Emma across the office. "That's the girl who wasn't afraid of anybody, changed my life, changed all our lives." And Frank Carter lived to see it all. That was the thing Emma was most grateful for, more than the house, more than the money, more than any of it. Her father lived. The treatments Victor had paid for had done their work, and slowly, month by month, Frank Carter had gotten stronger. The doctors called it a remarkable recovery. Emma called it a miracle, and she never once forgot what it had cost or how close she'd come to losing him. Frank had figured out the truth eventually, of course. He was too sharp not to. One evening, he'd looked at Emma over dinner and said, "This Victor, he's not really just a businessman, is he? And you didn't really just take a job." And Emma, who'd promised she'd never lie to Victor and had spent a year lying to her own father, had finally told him everything. The gala, the slap, the deal, all of it. Frank had been quiet for a long time, and then he'd said something Emma never forgot. "You saved my life by walking into a room full of dangerous men, and instead of letting it turn you hard, you made it turn you into someone who saves other people too." He'd taken her hand. "Your mother would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And this man, this Victor, whatever he was before, he's the man who kept you safe and gave me back my life. I'd like to shake his hand." And he had. And Victor Voss, who'd never had a father worth the name, who'd inherited nothing but violence from his own, had sat with Frank Carter and been treated, for the first time in his life, like a son worth being proud of. Emma had watched them talking on the porch one evening, her dying father who wasn't dying anymore, and the Mafia boss who wasn't a Mafia boss anymore, and she'd thought her heart might burst. Which brought them to the night of the gala. It was a charity event, of course. The Carter Foundation's first annual fundraiser, held in the very same ballroom of the very same hotel where, 2 years earlier, a tired young event manager had slapped an arrogant millionaire across the face. Emma had chosen the venue on purpose. There was something right about it, something that felt like closing a circle. The room was full again, hundreds of guests, but they were different guests now, or at least they behaved differently, because the foundation had a way of drawing out the better angels in people. And working the event, in crisp uniforms, were the same kind of waiters and waitresses who'd once been invisible. Except tonight, they were the guests of honor too, because the whole point of the evening was them. Rose Miller was there, of course, seated at the head table, beaming. And Victor Voss stood at the front of the room to speak, and Emma watched him from the side, and she thought about how far this man had come. 2 years ago, he'd walked into this room and humiliated an old woman over a glass of wine. Tonight he stood in the same room with no bodyguards, no intimidating entourage, no cold mask, just a man in a good suit about to talk about why the people the world forgot deserved to be remembered. He didn't speak long. Victor had never been a man of many words, but what he said, Emma would remember for the rest of her life. 2 years ago, he began, in this exact room, I was the worst version of a man it's possible to be. I had money and power, and I used both of them to make a woman who'd done nothing wrong feel like she was nothing. Her name is Rose Miller, and she's sitting right there, and I've apologized to her privately, but I want to do it publicly too, because what I did to her was cruel. And she deserves to hear that the man who did it knows exactly how wrong he was. The room was very quiet. Rose was crying and smiling both at once. And that night, Victor went on, in front of all these important people, one person stood up. One person who had every reason to keep her head down, who had a sick father and a job she couldn't afford to lose, and no reason in the world to make trouble. She stood up anyway. She looked me in the eye and told me that money didn't give me the right to treat another human being like garbage. And when I put my hands on her, she slapped me across the face in front of every powerful person in this city. A ripple of astonished laughter went through the crowd. I deserved it, Victor said simply. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because that slap woke me up. That woman and everything she did after turned me from the man I was into whatever I am now. Everything good in my life traces back to the night a waitress refused to be afraid of me. He looked across the room and his eyes found Emma, and everyone followed his gaze. So this foundation, this work, all of it, it exists because of her. Emma Carter, would you come up here, please? Emma hadn't expected that. She made her way to the front, her cheeks warm, and Victor took her hand as she reached him. And then he did something she really hadn't expected. He reached into his pocket and drew out a ring, and Emma recognized it because she'd seen it before, a lifetime ago. It was the ring from their fake engagement, the one that had been part of a lie, a prop in a dangerous game, a symbol of a deal made under threat. But Victor got down on one knee, right there in front of hundreds of people in the same ballroom where she'd slapped him, and he held it up with a hand that, for the first time in his adult life, was trembling not with rage, but with something else entirely. "The first time I gave you this ring," he said, and his voice wasn't quite steady. "It was a lie. It was part of a deal. You wore it to save your father's life, and I gave it to you to save my own skin, and neither of us meant a single thing by it." He swallowed. "I'm giving it to you again now, but this time there's no deal. There's no game. There's no threat hanging over either of us. This time, I'm just a man who loves a woman more than he ever thought he was capable of loving anything, asking her the only question that's ever really mattered to me." His eyes were shining. "Emma Carter, will you marry me? For real this time, for good, forever." The whole room held its breath. And Emma, who'd walked into this ballroom 2 years ago as an invisible woman with holes in her shoes and a father she was terrified of losing, looked down at the man kneeling in front of her, the most feared man in the Midwest, brought to his knees not by a gun this time but by love, and she felt her whole life fold together into this single perfect moment. She reached down and touched his cheek, the same cheek. She could still feel the ghost of that slap in her palm, even now. "When I first met you," she said, and her voice carried in the silent room, "I thought you were the worst man I had ever seen in my life." A nervous laugh moved through the crowd. Victor smiled up at her, unafraid. "And now?" he asked. Emma looked into his eyes, and she saw everything there. All of it, the whole impossible journey, the gala and the slap and the ruined life and the deal and the fortress and the poetry by the fire and the warehouse and the blood and the man on his knees choosing mercy over vengeance, all of it leading here, to this. "Now," Emma said, "I know you were never really the worst man in the world. You were just a man who'd been alone so long he'd forgotten how to be anything else. A man who needed one person, just one, to look at him and believe he could still be better." Her eyes filled. I believed it, and you proved me right. Every single day, you proved me right." "Is that a yes?" Victor whispered. "That's a yes," Emma said. "That was always going to be a yes." And the ballroom erupted. The same room that had once fallen into horrified silence when a waitress struck a millionaire now filled with cheering and applause as that same waitress said yes to that same man. And Rose Miller was on her feet, clapping harder than anyone, and somewhere in the crowd, Frank Carter was crying openly, watching his daughter, whole and safe and loved, and knowing that the life she'd nearly given up to save his had given her back something greater than either of them could have imagined. Victor rose and slid the ring onto her finger, and this time it meant everything. And then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of the whole city, and Emma kissed him back, and there was nothing pretend about it. There never would be again. Later that night, after the guests had gone, the two of them stood alone in the emptying ballroom, in almost exactly the spot where it had all begun. "Right here," Emma said quietly, looking down at the floor. "This is where I slapped you." "I know," Victor said. "I remember the exact spot. I've thought about it 1,000 times. He pulled her against him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you just kept walking that night? If you'd done what everyone else in this room did and kept your head down and minded your own business?" Emma thought about it. She thought about the life she might have lived, the safe, small, invisible life, going to work and coming home, watching her father slip away and being unable to stop it, never knowing that a single moment of courage could crack the whole world open. "I never could have kept walking," she said. "That's the thing you never understood about me, even at the very end. I wasn't brave that night. I didn't decide to be a hero. I just couldn't stand there and watch someone hurt somebody weaker than them and do nothing. It wasn't a choice. It was just who I am." "I know," Victor said softly. "It's who you are. It's the thing that saved Rose, and saved your father, and saved a whole foundation full of people who needed someone to fight for them." He tilted her chin up. "And it's the thing that saved me. You couldn't walk past a stranger being hurt. And it turned out I was the biggest stranger of all, the most hurt of all, the one nobody had ever bothered to defend. And you didn't walk past me either, even when I gave you every reason to." Emma smiled up at him. "Somebody had to believe you could be better." "And that's the whole story, isn't it?" Victor said. "That's everything, right there." Their story had begun with a slap. A single, reckless, furious moment when a tired young woman decided that a stranger's dignity was worth more than her own safety. It had begun with the worst version of a man doing the cruelest thing he could think of, and the best version of a woman refusing to let him. It had traveled through blackmail and lies, through fear and danger, through gunfire and betrayal, and a man on his knees choosing to be merciful when everything in his history screamed at him to be otherwise. And it had ended here, in redemption, in two people who'd found in each other the thing neither of them had ever believed they'd get. Not money, not power, not safety. Those things had never been the point. What they'd found was the harder, rarer, more precious thing. They'd found someone who made them want to be better, and then believed they could be, and then stayed to watch them become it. Because in the end, that was the truth. Emma Carter had known in her bones from the very beginning, the truth she'd carried into that ballroom 2 years ago and never once let go of, even when it nearly cost her everything. The strongest force in the world was never money. It was never power. It was never fear. It was the courage to stand up for a stranger. It was the compassion to see a human being where everyone else saw a monster. And it was a heart brave enough to believe that even the most broken person alive could still be saved, and then love them fiercely enough to make it true. Emma had that kind of heart. She always had. And it had changed the most dangerous man in the city into a man worth loving, changed a criminal empire into a force for good, changed the lives of thousands of forgotten people who finally had someone in their corner, and changed one tired young woman with holes in her shoes into the bravest person anyone who knew her had ever met. It all began with a slap, and it ended, exactly as it should have, with love. Long after the ballroom had emptied and the lights of the hotel had dimmed, Emma stood by the window of the home that had once been a fortress, and she found herself thinking about the strange arithmetic of love, the way it never adds up the way you expect it to. Because if you had told her that first night that the man whose face she'd struck would one day become the great love of her life, she would have laughed in your face. Love, she'd always believed, was supposed to be gentle. It was supposed to arrive softly, between two people who liked the same things and wanted the same life, two people who fit together easily, without friction. That was the story everyone told. That was the love in the movies and the songs. Easy love, comfortable love, love that felt like coming home. But that wasn't what she and Victor had found. What they'd found had started with violence and blackmail, with a cruel man and a furious woman, with the worst possible version of two people meeting at the worst possible time. And Emma had come to understand something about that, something she thought was maybe the truest thing she knew. Love, real love, the kind that actually changes a life, is almost never the love that finds you at your best. It's the love that finds you at your worst and refuses to leave. Victor had been at his worst the night they met. He'd been cruel, arrogant, a man who'd buried whatever was human in him under 20 years of fear and armor. And the easy thing, the sensible thing, the thing every single person in that ballroom did, was to look at him and see a monster and stay away. That was the safe response. That was the reasonable response. Monsters are dangerous. You don't approach them. You don't challenge them. You certainly don't slap them across the face. But Emma had done the one thing nobody else was willing to do. She'd looked at the monster and refused to accept that the monster was all there was. Not because she was naive, and not because she saw something soft in him that first night, because she hadn't. There had been nothing soft in him to see. She challenged him simply because she believed, bone deep, that every human being contained the possibility of being better, and that no one, no matter how far gone, was beyond the reach of that possibility. And that, Emma had come to believe, was the real secret of love. Not attraction, not compatibility, not the 1,000 small pleasures of liking the same music and laughing at the same jokes. Those things were lovely, but they weren't the engine of it. The engine of it was belief. Love was the decision, made over and over, every single day, to believe in the best version of another person, even when they were showing you their worst. It was the willingness to hold a picture of who someone could be so steadily, so patiently, so stubbornly, that eventually they started to become it. She had done that for Victor. Not by excusing what he was, she'd never once excused it. She'd called him a monster to his face and meant it. But by insisting always that the monster wasn't the whole truth, that underneath it was a man who read poetry, who paid for a stranger's daughter's surgery, who was so lonely he'd blackmailed a waitress just to have one person in his life who wasn't afraid of him. She'd seen that man, and she'd spoken to that man, and she'd loved that man into existence, called him up out of the wreckage the way you'd coax a frightened animal out of hiding. And one day he'd looked around and realized he'd become the person she'd always insisted he could be. That was the miracle of it. Not that she'd found a good man. She hadn't. She'd found a bad man and believed in a good one until the good one was real. But Emma knew, too, that it went both ways, and this was the part people always forgot when they told stories like hers. Because it would be easy to say that she'd saved Victor, that she was the good woman who redeemed the bad man, and to leave it there. It would be easy, and it would be a lie. Because Victor had saved her, too, in ways that were quieter but just as real. She'd been drowning when they met. Not in the way he was, not in cruelty and isolation, but drowning all the same, in exhaustion, in fear, in the slow, grinding despair of watching her father die while she counted pennies she didn't have. She'd been a woman who'd given up everything, her friends, her dreams, her whole future, and told herself it was fine, told herself she didn't need any of it, told herself that survival was enough. She'd made herself small. She'd made herself invisible. She'd learned to want nothing because wanting things you couldn't have only hurt. And Victor, for all his darkness, had seen her, really seen her, in a way no one had in years. He'd looked at the invisible woman with the clipboard and found her to be the most interesting person in the room. He'd studied her life and understood her sacrifices and refused to let her keep making herself small. In loving her, he'd given her back the parts of herself she'd surrendered. He'd made her believe she deserved things again. He'd handed her the resources and the platform to become not just a survivor, but a force, a woman who could stand up for thousands of people the way she'd once stood up for Rose. So they'd saved each other. That was the thing Emma understood now, standing at the window in the quiet. It was never a story about a woman saving a man. It was a story about two half-drowned people reaching for each other in the dark and discovering that together, somehow, they could both stay afloat. That was what love actually was, underneath all the poetry. Two people agreeing to be the reason the other one doesn't go under. And there was one more thing, the hardest thing. The thing Emma had learned in that warehouse-shadowed year of blood and betrayal. Love, the real kind, was not safe. It could not be safe. Because to love someone fully was to hand them the power to destroy you and to trust them not to use it. Victor had understood this before she had. He'd told her once early on that caring about someone was a weakness, that the moment people knew what you loved, they knew how to hurt you. And he'd been right in a way. Dominic had proven him right. The moment Victor let himself love Emma, he'd acquired the one vulnerability that 15 years of enemies had never been able to find. Loving her had put a target on both their backs. It had nearly gotten them both killed. And yet, when Dominic had stood in that study with a gun pointed at Emma, Victor had gone down on his knees. The most feared man in the Midwest, a man who'd never surrendered anything to anyone, had knelt on the floor and offered his life without hesitation, gladly, because the alternative, a world without her, was worse than death. And Emma had done the same, had stepped between two men and a loaded gun, because she would rather have died than watch him die. That was the paradox at the very heart of it, the thing Emma turned over and over in her mind. Love made you weak, and love made you strong. It was the same thing. The vulnerability and the power were not two different things, but a single thing seen from two sides. To love someone was to become breakable in a way you'd never been before, and in that very breakability was a strength that nothing else in the world could touch. A man who feared death could be controlled. A man who would gladly die for someone he loved could not be controlled by anyone, because you cannot threaten a person with the one thing they've already chosen to give. Fear had ruled Victor's world for 20 years, and fear had failed him in the end, because Dominic had shown that fear buys obedience, but never loyalty. And then love had walked into that same world, wearing a waitress uniform, and in a matter of months, it had done what fear never could. It had made a broken man whole. It had ended a war without a single shot fired at that final table. It had turned enemies into something almost like friends, and it had reached even Dominic in the end, that lost and poisoned man, and pulled him back from the edge of one last murder. Love had proven itself, over and over, to be the only force in that violent world that actually changed anything. Emma had said it herself, at the very end, standing in the ballroom where it all began. The strongest force in the world was never money. Victor had money, mountains of it, and it had bought him a fortress and an empire and not one single night of peace. It was never power. Victor had power that made politicians tremble, and it had left him so alone he'd had to blackmail a stranger to have someone to talk to. And it was never fear, the currency he'd built his whole life on, the thing that had failed him at the exact moment he needed it most. It was courage, the courage of one tired woman to stand up for a stranger when everyone else looked away. It was compassion, the willingness to see a human being where the whole world saw a monster. And it was a heart brave enough to believe that even the most broken person alive could still be saved, and then stubborn enough, faithful enough, fierce enough to stay and make that belief come true. That was the whole of it. That was everything Emma had learned, the thing she'd carry for the rest of her life, and try to pass on through the foundation, through her marriage, through every stranger she'd ever refused to walk past. Love is not the reward you get for finding the right person. Love is the work of becoming the kind of person who can see the good in someone and call it forward. It is not a feeling that happens to you. It is a choice you make, again and again, to believe in someone until they become worth believing in. Emma had made that choice in a single furious instant, without even knowing she was making it, when she raised her hand and slapped a cruel man across the face because she could not bear to watch him hurt someone weaker than himself. She had made it every day after, in a fortress full of dangerous men. She had made it on her knees of the heart when she stepped in front of a gun, and she would go on making it every morning for the rest of her life, in a home that had stopped being a fortress because two people had decided to fill it with something stronger than any wall. She heard Victor's footsteps behind her, and then his arms came around her, and she leaned back against him and watched the lights of the city they'd both been remade in. "You're thinking again," he murmured. "I can always tell. You go somewhere far away." "I was thinking about that night," Emma said. "The slap. How the worst thing I ever did turned out to be the best thing I ever did." Victor was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't the worst thing you ever did," he said. "It was the bravest. There's a difference, and it's the only reason I'm standing here at all." He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "You saved a stranger that night, Emma. You just didn't know the stranger was me." And that, in the end, was the truest thing anyone ever said about it. She had slapped a rude man to defend a stranger, never knowing he was the most dangerous man in the city. But the deeper truth, the one that took them both 2 years and a lifetime of near misses to understand, was that the real stranger she'd saved that night was the frightened, lonely, buried man inside the monster, the one nobody else had ever bothered to look for. She had looked, she had found him, and she had loved him all the way home. That is the strongest force there is. Not money, not power, not fear. It is the simple, world-changing courage to believe that no one is beyond saving, and the love brave enough to prove it true.